Hello and welcome to the Celtic Huddle podcast. I'm Mark Wilson, and today, once again, I'm joined by the Celtic legend Simon Donnelly. And as you can see, a wee bit different from where we usually are. The snow has paid havoc to our travel arrangements, so we're from the comfort of our own homes. So let's get started. Another dramatic 7 days. We'll look at what the future holds for Celtic captain Scott Brown. We'll look at the new role of a director of football, what he may add. We'll also preview tomorrow night's game at St Mirren. We'll also be joined by John McGarry from the Scottish Daily Mail. John has obviously been following Celtic season closely, and he will give us his inside view. Also, get your comments in. We'll still receive them. Get your questions in. We'll read out as many as we possibly can. And as usual, we want to hear from you, the Celtic fans, and hear your opinions and questions. And I'm delighted to say once again, the podcast is now sponsored by First Star Legends Gin, First Class Transfers and Social Recluse. We thank them all for their support. So let's get to it, guys. No time to waste. Simon, let's start with yourself. Comments made by your teammate, or former teammate, should I say, John Collins last night on BBC Sports Sound Radio about Scott Brown. He said he should have been replaced in the summer, and that has been a problem this season. What do you make of that from John Collins? Is he right in what he's saying?
Well, I never heard the comments to start off with. Well, also, it's hard to, what context. Is he laying the blame at Scott's door? I think that would be very harsh this season. I certainly said a couple of seasons, 3 seasons ago, about when McGinn was at Hibs, as someone to come in and potentially replace Scott further down the line and learn off him at the time. Took a wee bit of stick for my views on that at the time. It certainly wasn't to replace Scott, but it was to come in there and be a successor further down the line. Now, you look back at the last few seasons, Bruni has been the leader in all the success that Celtic have had. And to say he should have been replaced at the start of the season, I think it's a wee bit harsh.
Yeah, John, let's bring you in, John McGarry for the Scottish Daily Mail. Thanks for joining us again. Just to put it in context, John Collins said one of his quotes was, the brain, at 35, he's talking about the brain is saying one thing, but the legs don't get across the pitch. He also went on to say it came to him as well, he was incredibly fit. But John, has he got a point there that he's not slagging off Scott Brown, but he's just saying his body probably isn't up to what it used to be, and that's been the problem in the Celtic midfield area this season?
I think that is a fair comment. I wouldn't say that Scott Brown is done as a player. Neil Lennon has tried to kind of spare him this season by taking him in and out. But clearly he's not somebody you can expect to play week in, week out at this point in time. I agree with what Simon said. I think the kind of succession planning should have taken place a number of years ago. You go back to 2016 when, before Brendan Rodgers came in, Scott Brown looked done then. He was injury prone, he couldn't get around the park, and clearly he kind of mended a few things. His lifestyle got an enormous renaissance and was just, imperious in Scotland for a number of seasons. But it comes to everybody. I remember Gary Neville once saying his legs went, not during a season, but during a game. He actually felt it happening during a game. So you've got to assume it's going to happen, at some time soon. Obviously they brought Sorrow in 1 year ago now, which was some kind of attempt to kind of shore up the midfield. But this was never a natural success for Scott Brown at this point. A young lad coming into a totally different country. You hadn't really seen him till kind of August, September time. John McGinn was the one. There's no doubt about that. He was the natural successor. He brought in, but that is obviously that particular horse is now long bolted. I would say that replacing Scott Brown is the single biggest job Celtic have got since Henrik Larsson left, and I mean that not so much in terms of his playing ability, in terms of what he brings to the club, in terms of the aura. It's an almost impossible task, and unfortunately with McGinn having slipped through the net now, they're going to find it really, really difficult to get a player of his quality for a reasonable fee.
Yeah, well, that's what I was going to say. I mean, where do you now find a replacement for somebody like Scott, who's not going to last just a season or 2 seasons and you sell them on? Because touching on that, I mean, I played with Scott. I think everybody knows that. I was there in his debut. Played a game against Kilmarnock. He was brought in for 4.4 million, which, see, at that time for a midfielder, a young Scottish midfielder, was an incredible amount of money. But you got longevity out of him. I was also looking at his season appearances since he came in. Now, bear with me for a second. How many appearances this guy's made since he started? And this is per season: 53, 55, 32 when he had a wee injury. Went 44, 34, 35, 56, 55, 41, 57, 58, 51, 50. And this season, at 35, coming on 36, he's made 31 appearances. And it's an incredible return from a player who has been consistent over the years and such a leader. And John makes a good point. Replacing could be the biggest effort or the greatest feat since replacing somebody as iconic as Henrik Larsson. And I worry where they're going to get that from, because you're right, John McGinn was the natural one, and yep, the horse is bolted. But is there anybody else out there, a young player coming through just now, that you could say, yeah, we'll spend 3, 4, 5 million even to bring this guy in, and he will last us for the next decade? I very much doubt he's out there, Sid.
There's nobody as obvious. And the reason I said McGinn, and a lot of people said McGinn at the time, I was working at the club and it was a Celtic Hibs game. It was 2 each, and McGinn got the 2 for Hibs.
I remember the game,
McGregor got the 2 for Celtic. And I thought they were the 2 best players on the pitch. But you're right, there's no obvious replacement out there now. This is where the recruitment side of it's going to have to come in. I still think there's a huge role for Bruni at the club. You know, I think he'll be the first to acknowledge when it's time to hang his boots up. But I think as far as a leader, I know he's got, you know, ideas of going into the coaching side of it, whether it was, you know, to go and work with the youths at Celtic. I think he's did little bits, had little tasters of that. There's certainly still a role for Scott Brown at Celtic in the future.
Well, Nicky McFadden here has commented, it's not even just his footballing ability, it's his whole stature. The guy's a true natural leader. His personality is exactly what you would want as a skipper. Where do we look now to take over? And it's a good point. I mean, to take over, maybe you're not going to get the same ilk as him, Joe, in the middle of the pitch, but does he still have something to offer? Now, I touched on there, he's played 31 games already. Now, next year, is he worth offering a new contract, a playing contract that is, and maybe a coaching side to that contract as well, to maybe chip in with 15, 20 games a season and still have that influence, still be in the dugout? Is it worth renewing that?
Yeah, I think that is the sensible solution, because I think he does still have something to offer as a player at this point in time. It was interesting that kind of season before Brendan Rodgers came in, Scott was taking a lot to do with the kind of youth team who's going down to, you know, Stranraer on a Wednesday night. And that was one thing that Brendan Rodgers said to him. He says, look, park that for the moment. You still got a good few years in them. You've got your whole life ahead of you. So that's something that he did. And I think that'll be something he'll now be looking to maybe reevaluate and maybe look at that again. But I don't see why there's any reason why you couldn't offer him structure some sort of contract where it's almost a kind of pay-per-play thing or something like that. 1 year deal to make sure he's available and can play in some games. And to an extent, to maybe mentor whoever does come in. You wouldn't want to lose that influence about the place. I mean, it's just invaluable to have a player like that, you know, who's been at the club for so long and who's achieved so much.
Yeah, well, Stephen Kennedy here has commented, Scott Brown has been a great servant for the club, deserves a coaching role at the club for next season or something between those lines. And that's a good point, because not every player who plays for a club deserves a coaching role. You know, because you've played for a club for a number of years doesn't give you a given right to then go into the coaching setup. Especially at such a big club, you need to learn your trade. But I think Scott Brown's slightly different in that respect. The almost control he's had over the Celtic team for the decade, even longer. You know, the relationship he's got with the youths, John, you touched on there. It's something that I think over the coming years there's going to be huge a huge transition at Celtic, you need to keep some sort of stability. And Sid, he'd be, well, for me, he'd be the guy that could make that transition smoother than what it's going to be.
100%. Well, all those reasons is why they should still have a future at the club. John touches on the mentoring side of it there as well, whether it is with the youth or even just the young guys coming into the team there. I read a comment along the bottom there about Davy Turnbull being the replacement. He's a slightly different player, but guys like that, guys like Sorrow, if he's going to be the future of Celtic, could learn a lot off Scott Brown. You know, he's got a big role still to play there. And even the playing side of it, he pops up the other night with a goal down at Rugby Park. They win at the weekend, he's in the side. You know, he's not finished yet.
Yeah, I tell you what, I like this one for Kieran Laverty there. It's just disappeared off my screen, But here's one for you. Alan Campbell, not the finished article, but could be moulded into the similar player. I think that Brown should move into a coaching role, but not under Lennon. Director of football with Maloney and Brown. Now, Alan Campbell, he has an interesting one. Watched him over a number of years now at Motherwell. Very good player. Who was it down south? Millwall, was it? He was almost away to. John, you might know that in the January transfer window. Motherwell managed to keep a hold of him. Could be one that Celtic are looking at possibly.
Yeah, well, I mean, the thing is as well, there's a certain kind of almost snobbery with some people about players that play in the Premier League. You know, whereas, you know, what you've got, if you sign somebody from a club like that, as we've seen with David Turnbull, as we saw with Scott Brown many years ago, is get somebody that can definitely do it. Whereas you bring in players from other countries who might have the technical ability, they might be good players in their own right, but they don't fit in, you know. And that's one thing about taking a player from another Premier League team. You know,
I'm well aware, John. Remember, I went for United. There was a snobbery right when I signed. they then signed every international right back in the world when I was there. Chaduri, Lustig, Matthews, Hinkle. I had them all because he didn't like a Scottish right back. But you're right, there is, when people think Alan Campbell, he plays for Motherwell, can he be good enough? Well, you look at some of the guys you're mentioning.
Look at some of the guys that have came to Celtic and had fantastic careers going back to your Brian McClare's coming from Motherwell. It's part of Celtic's history to, not so much take a gamble on these players, but acknowledge local talent. Phil O'Donnell's another one, came from Motherwell. Yeah. Guys that came and had really good careers at Celtic after establishing themselves in a smaller club. So, it's one route that Celtic need to have a look at.
So in terms of going back to Scott then, both of you deserve a deal on some sort of coaching capacity, but how does that work? If it's with Neil Lennon, I think that fits in perfectly. Scott and Neil's relationship has been strong throughout the years, so I don't think that's a problem. If it's somebody different, does a new manager just accept it, or is this one of the problems that Celtic have faced this year where a new manager hasn't had his say in his full coaching team? John?
Well, yeah, and this is the problem, isn't it? And it's about kind of demarcation lines and how this new structure is going to work. And there's obviously this kind of logjam at the moment whereby Dominic Mackay is due to come in on July the 1st, but by rights he would be very much involved in appointing the director of football, if that's what they're going to title it, because he's going to have to work with the guy and he's going to be, ultimately responsible for it. And then the manager's going to have to come in, you would think, and then the manager should really be having the final say on any players. So the point you make is a good one. It's all very well saying Scott Brown should get a new deal and is worthy of it. But really that should be a decision that's further down the line after that sort of chain of events has taken place. Yeah.
Well, let's move on to that director of football role. Something slightly new, slightly different for Celtic, moving with probably a lot of clubs down south, European clubs, of course, have implemented that, and it's a different chain of thought from Celtic. But John, you were just touching that there. So the specific roles of people within that, the lines of communication to the new chief exec and the manager are obviously so important to make the full system work. Is that something that's going to take a bit of time? We've got a period now from February to the end of June where Peter Lawwell will be there. do those movements start just now in identifying? And if so, who's identifying them? Is it Don Mackay? Is it Peter Lawwell?
Well, they should be taking place now, because you can't possibly start this process on July the 1st, by which point Celtic could be a week away from a European game. So we know how the world works. I mean, Dominic Mackay, I would imagine, will be having some input into this. It'll be with the SRU's approval, of course, but it's not uncommon in business for that to happen, despite the fact he's obviously still in that role. I think in terms of the whole director of football thing, it can be pretty much what you want it. It's one of these things that's really debated in the media, because there's a bit of suspicion about it, because the role tends to vary from club to club. So it can literally be whatever you want it to be. You can limit it to be a kind of almost a buffer role. You could maybe make a more kind of technical aspect to it, as you've got some clubs where there's maybe more of an input in the football side of things. Generally would oversee transfers. The person would oversee ordinarily the academy, many other things, but you can slice it and dice it as you like. But primarily, it's going to be the link person between the head coach or the manager and the boardroom, and therefore the manager will effectively be answerable to this person, and therefore the director of football should have a huge say in who's appointed as head coach.
Yeah, and see, to be honest, right, I've had it both ways. Now, I know at a minuscule level before anybody starts pitching in, but when I came into football at Airdrie, I had the director of football above me, Gordon Dale, and at Brecon, I was the manager and had a chairman and a committee to report to, and I loved the director of football role compared to it allowed me just to coach on the pitch, to pick the team, to pick the tactics, and deal with the squad and the youths as well. But any transfers or anything, I identified players, went to a director of football, and that's where he took over, and he got some real good ones over the line. Whereas at Brecon, you've got so much on your plate as a manager and try to concentrate on players coming in, recruitment, speaking to people on the phone, that I felt that distracted me. And I just think a lot of the young coaches now and modern coaches like the coaching stuff better than the politics. And I think for any manager, I think even Neil Lennon, for instance, would thrive off just doing the coaching stuff, as long as he's got a good connection with the director of football. So it's such a modern thing, but I think it's the right way to go. I mean, Sid, you were at Celtic under Wim Jansen and Dr. Joe Venglos when Jock Brown was general manager. I mean, what was that like? Was that a smooth period at the club? Was it smooth operation?
It wasn't a smooth operation, because obviously we started that season, without a manager with him, and they were still trying to appoint. But I can't really get into the depths of that, because I was a young player in the team. But I think someday a go-between there, as you say, to take the pressure off the actual coach themselves is possibly the way forward. But at the same time, you have to be singing off the same hymn sheet in terms of who you're bringing in. If a director of football is in charge of bringing players in, it's got to be off the same hymn sheet as the coach. Back then with Dr. Joe, we got Lubo, Vim brought Henrik. There was an influx of players, in '98. A lot of Scottish players. Lambo came in, Craig Burley came in, Darren Jackson came in, which I've got no doubt had a lot of, linkage between Jock and the Scottish setup, the national setup. We just played at the World Cup, or we're going to play at the World Cup rather. But I think you can't just have players getting flung at the manager. I mean, we touched on it before we came on air, with John making a good point about Cham last week at Marseille, where, reading between the lines, it's so obvious that Villas-Boas didn't want him, or didn't know he was coming in, or that was his story. Ultimately, he's lost his job over it. So there needs to be a togetherness there and a team.
Yeah, it's all got to click into place, and be in harmony. Kieran Nolan here, director of football, provide potential conflict when trying to appoint a new manager. I think Stephen Kennedy just had a point before saying Dominic Mackay should be shadowing Lawwell just now to learn the ins and outs, the way the club should be run. John, just on Dominic Mackay, now, is it a worry that he's in rugby and his background, well, communications, but it's a totally different sport coming across. Should Celtic fans be concerned with that, with no director of football being appointed? Should Peter Lawwell have some influence knowing how the club works, how the football system works, or is Dominic Mackay across all that as well?
I think it's a huge cultural change. You're moving from rugby into football, and there's no question that Dominic Mackay has done extremely well at the SRU with the commercial deals and behind the scenes. He seems to be a very good kind of political animal, but you're not going to get, rugby fans outside a stadium demonstrating with banners, players haven't leaving their cars. There is just no comparison. But he is a Celtic supporter, and I think he will realise that this is a completely different environment he's getting into. There'll be far more scrutiny on him from the media, from supporters, and that failure's really not an option. People don't buy into long-term plans. They want success yesterday. In terms of the whole structural thing, I think the director of football role got a bit of a bad name at Celtic because of the Ken Dalglish, John Barnes thing. But I don't think it was the structure that was the problem. I think it was John Barnes was the wrong choice. And it's a bit like, the traditional role of just a manager. If you appoint the right manager, it's the right structure. It's to do with the people in the roles more than the structure. As long as the location lines are clearly defined and you know what's happening. I mean, just one example I thought of earlier on was at Newcastle when Kevin Keegan was working under Dennis Wise, wasn't it? And Dennis Wise was basically signing players that Kevin Keegan didn't want, and it led to a little bit of tension,
That can't happen. That can't happen, can it, John? No.
Yeah, it's got to be clearly defined from the outset. And that's not to say that a director of football can't, his job would be to bring players to the table, but you would imagine that a head coach, I would think in Scotland, would have to have the final say over them. Like an old-fashioned manager in that sense, if you know what I mean.
Well, Patrick Crawley says the manager needs to have a clear vision as to where he wants to take the club and have identified a list of signing targets. And D. Boyle here, there should be a director of football before a coach is appointed so that the director of football will back his man. It's a complicated and quite a delicate situation Celtic find themselves in. I don't envy the people who are having to get this all correct, but all the pieces have to fall into place at the right time and have connections somehow, in my opinion. But it's believed that the interview process is underway for the director of football. And one of the names that's linked or believed to have been in the frame is Fergal Harkin of Man City. He's the head of partnerships at the Etihad. I've came across Fergal before, believe it or not, when I was at Celtic in 2006, 2007, around about that time, 2008. Fergal worked for Nike at the time, and it was at the time Celtic had just had the big sponsorship deal with a company, and Fergal was in at the club quite often. I'm pretty sure he came away with us on a couple of trips to the States, and he had a great connection with the players. He had a lot of access to the players, and he would chat. But I mean, a wee bit of history with Fergal. He played or was involved in the Martin and Neil Lester team, so he knows Neil Lennon. He knows the connection with the club. And after his spell at Nike, he went to Man City. When Man City, the money came into Man City, and he was identified as in the scouting department. He's obviously progressed throughout his time there, and he holds quite a position just now. He's in charge of all the loan markets, and well, believe what I read that loan market department at Man City is a huge department that he's running and overseeing. A couple of the players that you know well, and Cham obviously came from City, Patrick Roberts. So there is a connection with the club. Now, what do you think, Sid? An appointment like that, somebody with a football background, played the game, has worked his way through a different company, a different job title, back into football. He's dealt with Celtic in previous years. Would that fit the bill?
It sounds to me, I mean, I didn't know the guy, I'm just going by what you're saying there. Well, it sounds to me that a lot of the boxes get ticked there. You know, he's had a lot of experience around the game. He's been down at one of the biggest clubs in Britain, if not the world just now. So, yeah, somebody like that maybe coming in who would relieve the pressure on the manager to go and coach the team. But there still has to be that marriage. You know, I read another couple of comments on the bottom there. The manager of the team still really needs to be the guy. I mean, you can bring players to the manager's attention. That's part of the recruitment's job. But the manager really has to have the final say for me on the players that come in and who he's going to work with. So there has to be a marriage between those two roles. Fair.
I mean, Fergal would be a good one, John. On paper, anyway. The fact that what Sid's saying there, identifying the manager has to have the final say, no doubt about that. But if you look at where he's been and the resources he's had at Man City, the stretch that he's went to for players and analysing players, he must have a list of players that you might think would do well in Scotland. Now, if he's bringing that kind of calibre of players to Neil Lennon's attention, or another manager if it is in the summer, that's got to be that's got to be where Celtic are looking to go in the coming years, surely.
Yeah, I think he's a very interesting character. I mean, one aspect of his job is obviously to make sure that players who are out on loan from Man City are happy, and getting them to believe that if they perform, they've got a pathway into the Man City first team. Now, that must be extraordinarily difficult. You know,
it's a hard sell, that, is it not, John? Saying to some of these boys, you do well at, say, Huddersfield, and you're getting in the Man City team.
Yeah, it's a very, very hard, it's probably the hardest sell in football, that one. But I think it's interesting in the sense that Celtic have lost a number of players on a permanent basis. You look at Morrison going to Bayern Munich, Josh Adam, young lad, went to Man City last summer. Was it Boy Hughes, young goalkeeper, went to Liverpool the other week there, and it looks like Dembele's going to go as well. So guaranteeing Celtic young players a pathway into the first team seems to be difficult. This guy seems to have the kind of skill set that kind of gives them the kind of comfort that if they go out alone somewhere, they will get that opportunity. But more than that, though, he's also a guy that knows football, goes around, some of the biggest clubs in England and in Europe, will know people, will know players, and he obviously knows the kind of business of football as well. And he obviously, I don't know if he played with Leicester, but he played in Ireland. He's played at a reasonable level as well. So yeah, but I think he, like anything else, so he's an interesting candidate, but this process has got to be exhaustive. They've got to make sure they get absolutely the right person in here, because this structure, as you can understand it, it seems to be, if the head coach didn't work out, the better football would remain in place. So this guy's going to be in for the long haul, come what may. So it's absolutely imperative they don't just kind of appoint the first person that they like.
It's got to be attractive as well to the fan base. And, just at a point there, Gaz Smith, touching on season ticket, do you guys think that it will be a struggle for season ticket renewal next season, considering they've only brought in Kenny on a 4-month loan? Now, that comment, it goes right to the top. Every appointment from now till when Peter Lowell leaves in June is going to be scrutinised by the Celtic fans. Season ticket money is obviously a huge ask in this current climate, and for a club like Celtic, it's got to be perfect. So the appointment has to be spot on to give any hope, a green shoots of recovery to Celtic fans thinking, we like what we see in this appointment, we like what this guy may bring, and whether that's Fergal Harkin or not, well, who knows. But in terms of making the decision, I mean, guys, you've got to think it's Dom Mackay's appointment rather than Peter Lawwell's just now in terms of working relationship transparency. Who is interviewing the candidates just now? Because that was rumoured that he's interviewed. Is Dom Mackay, like the earlier tweet, shadowing Peter Lawwell just now? Is it Peter Lawwell it's doing the interviews? And if so, is that right?
Well, I think the trouble is you have got this logjam situation at the moment where everyone knows that Peter Lawwell's leaving on the 30th of June, and he therefore won't have to work with the director of football or anyone that's subsequently appointed. I would think for that reason, and I'm not saying this with any inside knowledge, but I would imagine Celtic have had to kind of level with the SRU and say, look, can we borrow Dominic for a few hours because we have got these very important appointments to make, and we would, it's imperative that he has a big say in this. I would imagine the SRU would be understanding of that situation, and that Dominic would have to play some part in it because it just doesn't work otherwise. There's no point in Peter interviewing all the candidates, appointing somebody, and then walking out the door on June the 30th.
Yeah.
But I think the season ticket thing always comes back to that, isn't it? I mean, for all this, there is a slight, I keep using the word logjam, but this whole situation with Dominic coming in, fundamentally though, in order for Celtic to push their season tickets, and that will be coming up pretty soon, they are going to have to offer huge clarity on what lies ahead. There's going to have to be some kind of statement because they couldn't possibly go to their fan base as things stand and ask them to dip into their pockets in the current climate when things are really clear as mud in terms of who's going to be there next season.
Well, I think the Celtic fans have been let down and disappointed by there being no announcement of the review in January. Now we're into February, there's still no review. I think come March, that's when the season ticket things get sent out. So I think there's huge disappointment that nothing's been said. But Cara Gray there just said earlier on, as long as Neil Lennon's not there, that's the main thing. Brian Murphy backed that up, saying the large majority of fans will not accept Neil Lennon there. Stephen Kennedy is slightly different. Heard Lennon talking the other day, and he's planning for next season. And that has been the sounds coming out of Neil Lennon, that he truly believes that he's going to be Celtic manager next year. Whether you think that's right or wrong, he seems to be certain that he's going to be there. And we can just see some of the comments. That is a worry for some Celtic fans. But it'll be interesting to see in the coming weeks who else name gets linked with this job, a director of football. Dom Mackay's in, he's ticked off. There are still positions to be filled that will be watched very, very closely, especially coming up season ticket renewal time. So let's move on, guys. There is a game tomorrow. We keep forgetting because there is so much to talk about Celtic. But said Celtic are now 2 games unbeaten after wins against Killie and Motherwell. What have you made of the performances? Much better in your opinion?
A lot better. Sat and watched the game Rugby Park last week, potentially on the form, and it could have been a tricky one going down there. I know Kilmarnock had just lost their manager, plastic pitch, the old cliches, but it's a horrible place to go and try and get results at times. But I thought Celtic were very comfortable on the night. Took that into the weekend. I thought for large parts of the game and at the weekend they looked good. But again, that wee bit of whether it's confidence just now, that I think the goal takes a deflection over Bain, but they're a clearance off the line from losing another 2 points at the death. So as much as I would say the first 60-65 was decent, you're still concerned with how the game kind of panned out a wee bit. But again, they're going from game to game. Well, all you can do is go and try and win them. It's went quiet in terms of what's happening next at the club. I think John's right there, that they'll have a situation at some point if there's no clarity for moving forward with season ticket sales. But for the boys now that are playing, they can only just go into each game and try and win them and see what happens.
Well, that's right. I mean, against Kilmarnock last week, I thought they were brilliant. I really did. I thought as many complaints as...
Do you know what I thought? And I think everybody must scratch their head with it when you're watching this. How can they be so far behind?
Yeah, performances like that.
When you look at, I know that people will throw back, well, they've been inconsistent and they've been poor with set plays and stuff. But when you see them performing like that, you think there isn't a huge gap there, but there is, if you know what I mean, with the points.
I thought as many complaints as there have been about the Kelly pitch, I thought the Kelly pitch helped Celtic last week. I thought it was slick. They moved it quick. Things were one touch. I thought Welsh coming in with Ayer at the back, there was no dilly-dallying on the ball that Shane Duffy has brought, and that's in possession. I'm not even talking about his defending. I'm talking when Welsh got it or Ayer got it, every time they got it, it was two touch into Brown or McGregor or one of the better players to go and make things happen. And I think they look so much better. Same on Saturday. I thought at times they looked good, and it was because they moved it quick. But I seen what Neil was doing after the game, John, when he says the team was outstanding and he used other superlatives that I thought may have been a wee bit over the top at times. But he has to build up his players' confidence after tearing strips off them a couple of weeks ago, doesn't he?
Yeah, I mean, he must wake up someone's and think, where do, when you're capable of playing like they did at Kilmarnock, where do performances like the one against St Mirren come from? It's just like a different team turning up, and it's been. I've rarely seen a season where a team has lurched from one extreme to the next, because on the day, we have seen it. I mean, the Scottish Cup semi-final against Aberdeen, it looked at that point in time as if the kind of Celtic of previous seasons was back, and then they just into a kind of a tailspin. There just seems to be a kind of that mentality to grind out 5-6 performances like that just hasn't been there. Although they played very well last midweek and were, decent enough against Motherwell, you're never wholly convinced it's going to happen in the next game. Just too many players have just had up and down seasons. You've not had anyone who's really been, a kind of 8 out of 10 every week.
Well, here's one for you, John. Here's one, 8 out of 10 every week. Turnbull. Kieran Nolan here. Turnbull's the difference in the 10 position. He makes it happen. Needs to stay there positionally. He's probably one who shoots down that theory. 8 out of 10 every week. He has had these off days, but he's the one that makes things tick for Celtic just now, is he not?
Yes. So I'll definitely exempt him from any criticism. He's been really, really good since he came in, particularly given what he had to put up with the transfer collapsing the year before, the COVID diagnosis, all that kind of thing. He's really an into a team which is struggling. He's really he's done exceptionally well. And you compare him with somebody like Tom Rogic, who we know has got extraordinary ability, but just looks as if he just rather not be there. And I think that's the problem. That you can. Why did Neil keep Rogic on the other day and take Turnbull off? Did we hear anything about a knock? I know these decisions can sometimes be in your mind, but I was puzzled by that one. Yeah. I don't think there was a knock. I mean, I think Neil just like everyone else sees Rogic and sees this player from 2 or 3 seasons ago who was just astonishingly good at times, and it is in there, and he'll probably will move on and he'll deliver for a Spanish or a German club, as we know he can do. But he's been, unfortunately for Celtic this season, players like David Turnbull have been the exception, and guys like Tom Rogic have been the rule. Guys who just clearly don't want to be there, haven't really delivered, and I honestly think that the lack of fans it's been significant in many respects, particularly Celtic Park, where most of the kind of the worst results have come. But I really believe that a lot of these guys have been in first, second gear because they realise that there's nobody that's going to get on their case, and that's really unforgivable.
Well, here's maybe the biggest one in some Celtic fans' eyes, Odsonne Edouard. I mean, Neil Lennon signalled out for a wee bit of criticism after the game, just saying that he wants more from him and he's still got more to give. Said for a striker, he's still got a good return from goals, 17 and 29. 17 goals this season, 29. By anyone's stretch, that's a good return. in February from your striker. But can you understand Neil's frustrations with him?
Because I think we've all seen what he can produce previous seasons. You're right, 17's it's more than good return, and he's hit a wee purple patch the last 4 or 5 games, but there's more in there with Edward. There's more in there. We've seen it before, whether it was at Ibrox scoring big goals against Rangers.
That is a problem. Do you know? I think 17 goals, but not so many of those big goals. And you could argue probably away from home in Europe he scores a couple of big games, but everybody always looks at games against Rangers and your contribution, especially at the top end of the pitch when you're a striker, a winger. Does he do it against Rangers? Edward has in the past. He's not done it this season, has he?
I think the first game, obviously, nobody
well, he
really
wasn't.
turned up.
Yeah, he wasn't there. He didn't play. Of course.
Celtic didn't perform on the day at all. At Ibrox, well, we all seen how the game went. You know, it was reminiscent of the 90s Celtic until the sending off. But there's definitely a lot more in the tank with Edward.
What do you think? Do you think he's better in a partnership with Griffiths or a Yeti, or do you think he's better that lone striker?
I think better in a two, because he likes to come off, and with Griffiths there, who likes to play on the shoulder of centre backs, it was a perfect foil for Edward at the start of last year, before the lockdown, when they were really getting into games. And it was what you expect for Celtic: a lot of creativity, goals. You know, they were blowing teams away, and I thought it really stemmed from the two of them up top. I know they went 3 at the back. They changed it from coming back from Dubai last time, but I definitely think he's better with a pairing. I thought with Ayeti the other night as well. Ayeti took his goal. That's the best I've seen him. Took his goal really well against Kilmarnock. But I think Odsonne definitely benefits for having another player up there with him.
Yeah. And what's the future then for him, John? Is he just playing out this season, and then will Celtic sell him in the summer, or do you think he is going to be part of this new revamped club come July? And if so, if they are going to sell him, well, what is he worth now? Is he worth what he was at the start of the season? Has that price tag went down?
The problem Celtic have got is that they would probably have sold him for the right price last summer, but then COVID comes along and the market crashes, and then they've got a player who, through no fault of Celtic's own, is kind of at the club maybe for one season more than he would ideally have liked. The problem is he gets another year far towards the end of his contract. All the talk of him signing an extension has gone pretty quiet, and the difficulty is that having paid upwards of 10 million for him, and with PSG, I think they enjoy quite a slice of the sale on. Celtic would need to get upwards of £20 million to kind of to recoup their investment. And in the current climate, the market will recover to a certain extent in the summer, you would imagine, but it's not going to go back to where it was 2-3 years ago. So it is difficult. I certainly don't think Celtic are going to make anything like the money they stood to make on him maybe a couple of years ago, or they did make on Moussa Dembele. That's partly because of just the way the world has gone. It's partly because he's tailed off a little bit. But I just find it extraordinary that if you're a player who's at a club, even if you would ideally like to have moved on, is it not in your interests to be playing the best you can every single week to make sure you're 25, 30 goals, to make sure you've got the top teams in Europe snuffing around you? To me, that is just, common sense. I don't quite understand why he tailed off. I mean, Edward did obviously test positive for COVID, to give him his dues. I think that did take it out of him a little bit. Yeah. But there had been games, the Ross County home game in the League Cup in particular, I thought his body language was all wrong. But listen, he's got 7-7 and 17 for the season, so he's maybe timing it well, and maybe by the end of this season, there'll be clubs who are felt the right money again.
Footballers always seem to play well at the right time, John. I've known that in my career. When contracts winding down, or where there's a transfer window coming up in the summer, they always seem to just find the right form. But like you touched on Dembele there, Sid. For you, Edward compared to Dembele, transfer fee was used for Dembele. Is potentially Edward a better all-round player than Moussa Dembele?
It's a difficult
Not
one.
sure?
Not sure. It'll be interesting to see how their careers go from here on in. I think Dembele's a couple of years older, maybe a wee bit older than Edward. I've watched Edward more or less throughout his Celtic career, having done a wee bit of work round about the club. Mm-hmm. Always thought at 19, rough around the edges, like we all probably were at that age, really hit form in the last couple of seasons. It'll be interesting. I think John's right there, obviously, with the climate. I think trying to recoup money or fees that were talked about this time last year will be difficult. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in the summer. But it's a difficult one for me to see who's the best out of the two of them.
Who's the best, yeah. Well, back to tomorrow night, guys, just before we go. Look, a tough game against St Mirren. Jim Goodwin's got them playing incredibly well this season. Jim's taking a lot of credit, and rightly so. They beat Kilmarnock 2-0 at the weekend. John, what's your thoughts tomorrow night? Score predictions? How will St Mirren set up?
I think it'll be a really interesting game. I mean, Jim yesterday said he made a point of saying that St Mirren would go out and attack Celtic the same way they did at Celtic Park, which was really enterprising and ultimately asked questions that Celtic couldn't answer. So yeah, they are going to have a go, and fair play to them. They're really one of the success stories of the season. Their signs have been really good. He's got a real spirit about the place, and they've every chance to make the top six, which would be a tremendous achievement. I've got a feeling Celtic might just sneak this one, though. I mean, I think there are signs that things are coming back a little bit. John Joe Kenny does look good as a ball than Frimpong was, and I think there's players are maybe beginning to come back into form. Edward being a case in point. So I think it might be by the odd goal in 3, but I think Celtic might just do enough.
Yeah, Sid, what do you think? Tough game.
Yeah, it's definitely a tough game. St Mirren are doing really well, but I would go with John. I was going to say the odd goal in 3 as well. I think 2-1 for Celtic. I think there was wee signs in the last couple of games, and I expect them to probably just get the result, but it'll be a tough one.
Yeah, but that's the thing now. I think Celtic fans just want the result now, because I think the important thing is closing the gap as much as you can by the end of the season, and I don't think they'll bother how the team actually plays away at a hard ground where St Mirren were fantastic at Celtic Park. But that's quite ballsy of Jim, John, to come out and say, look, we're going to attack them. We've got nothing to fear. It worked the last time. Why would we change it? And I suppose in young managers, that's quite refreshing to hear. But listen, that's us. So a win apiece for you against St Mirren tomorrow night. Fingers crossed it is. And that's us for this week. John, thanks very much for joining us. Sid,
pleasure.
Thanks again for joining us. And thanks to everybody who's watched us in this slightly odd one where I'm broadcasting from my son's bedroom, which is quite odd. And thanks for the sponsors once again: First Star Legends Gin, Social Recluse, and First Class Transfers. We'll see you all again next week. Thanks.
Cheers.